I sat in the living room, the faint scent of his cologne still lingering in the air, but everything else felt different. The house, once a warm home, now seemed cold and empty. I looked at the spot where the safe used to be, the place where all our savings had been locked away, and now it was nothing but a metal shell. My heart pounded as I stood there, trying to make sense of what had just happened. A few hours ago, I had kissed him goodbye, thinking everything was normal. But now, the truth hit me like a wave. My husband, the man I had trusted for years, had taken everything, our savings, our future, and disappeared without a trace. I felt a pit form in my stomach. How had I missed it? The signs had been there, scattered around like breadcrumbs, but I had ignored them. For weeks, he had been distant, working late and avoiding questions about money. Whenever I brought up our finances, he'd assure me everything was fine. But it wasn't. It wasn't fine at all. I thought I knew him, thought I could trust him. But in that moment, as I stood in the silence of our empty house, I realized I didn't know him at all. I grabbed my phone and dialed his number, my hands trembling as I waited for him to pick up. It rang and rang, but he didn't answer. No surprise there. He was probably too far gone by now. I could feel the weight of my chest tightening with each unanswered ring. That's when I received the message. "He's not coming back," it said. I stared at the screen, the words not sinking in at first. But as the truth began to settle in, my mind started racing. How could he? How could he leave me like this, with nothing but empty promises and lies? I couldn't just sit back and let him get away with this. I wasn't going to let him win. Not this time. For a moment, panic tried to claw its way up my throat, but I pushed it down. I wasn't going to give in to fear. I'd always been the calm one, the one who solved problems. And I was going to solve this one too. I wasn't just going to get our money back, I was going to make him pay for what he'd done. And I knew just how to do it. I started digging through the house, looking for anything that might give me a clue. His phone, his computer, his bank statements. I needed it all. As I rifled through drawers and opened his briefcase, I found his personal journal tucked away in the back of a shelf. It was strange, something he had never mentioned before. I flipped it open, and immediately, I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me. "She won't suspect a thing," the last entry read. "By the time she realizes what's happening, it'll be too late. I'll have everything I need." I felt a cold shiver run through me. He had been planning this, planning it for months, and I had been too blind to see it. But this journal, these notes, they were proof of his betrayal. I tucked the journal into my bag. This was only the beginning. I couldn't let him get away with this. I had to act fast. He might be out there somewhere, running off with everything we had. But I was about to turn the tables on him. The trap was set, and he didn't even know it yet. He thought he had won, but he had no idea what I was capable of. I wasn't just going to let him walk away. I was going to make sure he never saw it coming. The night was quiet as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the journal in front of me. The words written by my husband were burned into my mind, and they seemed to echo in the silence of the room. "By the time she realizes what's happening, it'll be too late." I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and disbelief. How could he do this to me? After everything we had been through together, all the years, the struggles, the memories, we had built a life, and he had destroyed it all in one selfish act. But as I thought about it, I realized something. He had underestimated me. I wasn't going to let this go without a fight. He may have taken all our savings, but he had left something behind, something far more valuable. His arrogance. He thought he could get away with it. He thought he could leave me in the dust, and I would just accept it. But he was wrong. I stood up, the weight of the journal still in my hands, and walked over to the small safe in the corner of the room. It was locked, but it didn't matter. I knew exactly where the key was. As I opened it, I found a few important documents, papers that I hadn't looked at in a while. Among them was a letter from his business partner, a man I had never trusted. As I skimmed through it, I saw more than enough to confirm my suspicions. My husband had been making deals behind my back, securing loans that he hadn't told me about. He had been planning his escape for months, weaving lies and deceit into the fabric of our life. I closed the safe and sat back down, feeling the weight of the evidence I had just uncovered. My plan was beginning to take shape. He thought he had outsmarted me, that I would be too blinded by my love for him to see the truth. But I had learned. I had learned how to play the game, and I was going to use his own lies against him. My next move was to create the perfect illusion. I needed him to think that I was lost without him, that I was desperate. I would pretend to be vulnerable, to be at my wit's end, so he would feel secure enough to reach out. But what he didn't know was that I wasn't alone. I had already contacted a few people who owed me favors, people who could help me set the trap. The pieces were falling into place, and soon, he would walk right into it. I thought about the last time we had talked, when he promised that everything was fine and that I had nothing to worry about. He had that look in his eyes, the same one that had always made me trust him, but now I saw it for what it was: manipulation. It was all part of his plan, and I had fallen for it. But not anymore. I took out my phone and typed a message to one of the people I had contacted earlier, setting the stage for what was about to come. I needed to know where he was, who he was meeting, and when he planned to make his move. As soon as I had that information, I would be ready. I would give him just enough hope to make him think he could get away with it all. But the truth was, he was already caught in my trap, and he didn't even know it yet. The days that followed felt like a blur of planning and strategy. Each moment I spent pretending to be defeated, to be helpless, made me sick to my stomach. But it was all part of the act. I couldn't let him suspect anything. I knew that if he caught on too soon, my entire plan would fall apart. So, I played my part perfectly, texting him about how lost I felt, how confused, and how I didn't know how I was going to manage without him. I even acted like I was considering going to the police, hoping it would trigger a sense of urgency in him. But the truth was, I wasn't considering any of that. I wasn't helpless, and I wasn't going to let him get away with what he had done. Every night, I went over the details of my plan, fine-tuning it. I couldn't afford any mistakes. One slip-up, one wrong move, and he could disappear for good, leaving me with nothing. But everything was falling into place. I began tracking his movements. I had my sources watching his phone, his email, even his bank accounts. I couldn't let him know, but he was already slipping up. His transactions were small at first, but they were building up to something bigger. He was trying to move the money, to make sure it couldn't be traced back to him. But I knew exactly what he was doing. Every little transaction was another clue, another piece of evidence. I spent hours each day going through the documents he had left behind, piecing together his escape plan. There was one particular document that stood out. It was a flight itinerary, a ticket to a city across the country. I knew he was planning to leave soon, maybe even that very day. The excitement bubbled inside me, but I quickly pushed it down. I couldn't afford to act rashly. This was my moment to strike, and I had to be patient. I called my contact again, confirming the details. He had traced my husband's movements to a private location, somewhere out of the way where he thought he would be safe. It was the perfect place for a confrontation. A secluded hotel where he'd think he was meeting someone who could help him. But instead, it was going to be me waiting for him, armed with everything I needed to expose his lies. The more I thought about it, the more confident I became. He had no idea what was coming. He thought I was just a pawn in his game, someone he could manipulate and control. But I had been watching, listening, learning. I knew how he operated, and I knew how to use that against him. He had underestimated me. The night before the meeting, I sat in my car outside the hotel where he was supposed to be meeting his contact. I watched the people going in and out, pretending I was just another passerby. But inside, I was focused, calculating my every move. I needed him to trust me, to believe that I had given up on trying to stop him. And once he did, once he thought I was completely in his hands, I would spring my trap. I checked my phone one last time before stepping out of the car. The message was clear. He's on his way. My heart raced. This was it. My husband, the man who had taken everything from me, was about to walk right into the trap I had set. I couldn't wait to see the look on his face when he realized he had been caught. I stood outside the hotel, my eyes scanning the entrance, waiting for him. The cold wind nipped at my skin, but I barely felt it. Inside, my mind was sharp, focused. Every step of this plan had been carefully laid out, and there was no room for error. My heart raced, but it wasn't out of fear. It was anticipation. I was ready. The hotel lobby was quiet, empty aside from a few late-night travelers. I walked in casually, trying to blend in, my footsteps steady on the polished floor. I had called ahead and arranged for a room under a false name. The keycard was already in my pocket, and the room was set up perfectly. It looked ordinary, but the walls were lined with cameras and recording devices, all set to capture whatever unfolded when he walked in. A few minutes passed, and then I saw him. He walked through the door, looking exactly how I remembered him, confident, self-assured, as if nothing could touch him. He hadn't changed. He didn't see me yet, but I could see him scanning the room, looking for someone who could help him out of this mess he had created. What he didn't realize was that I was the one waiting for him. I took a deep breath and walked towards the bar area, where a waiter was polishing glasses. My movements were casual, deliberate, and I couldn't help but notice how my husband's eyes flickered toward me, a spark of recognition flashing through them. It wasn't much, just a brief look, but I saw it. He knew something wasn't right. I didn't make my move yet. I needed him to feel comfortable. I needed him to believe he had control over the situation, that everything was going according to his plan. He would make the first move. I could feel the tension building, the anticipation that was thick in the air. As I reached the corner, I paused, giving him the space he needed to approach. He came toward me, his face lighting up with a smile that used to make my heart flutter, but now it felt like a mask, a lie. "Sophie," he said, his voice smooth, too smooth. "I didn't think you'd actually show up." I gave him a faint smile, playing the part I had rehearsed. "I've been thinking a lot," I said softly. "About everything. I want this to be over. I want us to be okay again." His smile widened. He didn't suspect a thing. He thought I had fallen into his trap, that I was desperate, that I would forgive him if he played the right cards. But the truth was, I wasn't here to forgive. I wasn't here to reconcile. I was here to expose him. "You're right," he said, taking my hand and leading me to the corner of the bar. "I've made some mistakes, Sophie. I've made some things worse than they needed to be. But it's not too late. We can still fix this." His words were like a well-rehearsed speech, designed to ease my mind, to make me feel like he was still the man I once knew. But I could see right through him now. Every word, every gesture was calculated, and I had calculated every step I was about to take. "Why don't we go to the room?" he suggested, his eyes gleaming with false hope. "We can talk there, just you and me. We can figure this out." I nodded, playing the part. "Okay," I said, my voice steady. Inside, my pulse quickened. He was taking the bait, and he didn't even know what was coming. We walked through the hotel hallway, his hand resting on the small of my back, as if trying to reassure me. But I didn't need reassurance. I was in control now. We reached the room, and I could see the flicker of hope in his eyes. I swiped the keycard, and we stepped inside. The moment the door clicked shut behind us, everything changed. I turned to him, a calm smile on my face. "I'm glad you came, James," I said, using his name for the first time in days. The sound of it felt strange now, like it belonged to someone else. But there's something you should know. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. What do you mean? He asked, a nervous edge creeping into his voice. I reached into my bag and pulled out the journal. His journal. The one I had found days ago. The one where he had detailed his plan. The one where he had believed I wouldn't catch on. I opened it slowly, flipping to the last entry. His face went pale as he saw the pages in my hands. His mouth went dry, and for the first time I saw the man who had thought he was invincible start to crumble. This, I said, showing him the words, is everything. Every lie, every plan, every betrayal. I have it all. The color drained from his face as his gaze flicked between the journal and my unflinching expression. The trap was set. And now, he was the one who was caught. He stumbled backward, his hands raised in an attempt to defend himself, but the words he spoke were no longer confident. Sophie, listen to me, he stammered, his voice shaking. You don't understand. I was just trying to fix everything. I didn't want to hurt you. He cut himself off, realizing how weak his excuses sounded now. I didn't move, didn't flinch. My eyes stayed locked on his, watching him as his entire demeanor shifted from cocky confidence to panic. It was almost pitiful. The man who had taken everything from me, who had thought he could walk away without consequence, was now cornered, and it was all unfolding exactly how I had planned. Fix everything? I repeated, my voice calm and steady. You're a liar, James. You never wanted to fix anything. You only cared about yourself. All those years, all that trust. What was it for? To use me as your stepping stone to get ahead? To take everything and leave me with nothing? He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes flickered toward the door, his mind calculating how he could escape, how he could still salvage this. But it was too late. There was no running from this. Not anymore. You thought you could get away with it, didn't you? I continued, stepping closer, holding the journal out for him to see. You thought I wouldn't figure it out. But I did. And now I'm going to make sure you pay for it. His face twisted with fear and desperation. He tried to reach for the journal, but I pulled it away, keeping it out of his grasp. Sophie, please, he begged, his voice almost a whisper now. I never meant for things to go this far. Don't lie, I interrupted, my voice sharp. You planned every step, James. You took our money, you disappeared without a trace, thinking I wouldn't be able to catch up. But I did. You underestimated me, and now you're going to pay the price. I stepped back, putting some distance between us, watching as he struggled to regain control. His mind was racing, I could see it. He was already trying to come up with an escape plan, but it was too late for that. The evidence was all around him, and he knew it. The journal, the flight ticket, the bank records, the messages he thought were deleted, it was all there. You always thought I was weak, I said, shaking my head. That I wouldn't be able to stand up for myself. But I've learned, James. I've learned a lot in the past few days. And I'm not the same person I was before. His shoulders slumped, the weight of the situation finally sinking in. He was trapped, and he knew it. The bravado that had once been his shield was gone, leaving only a man who had overestimated his ability to control everything around him. Please, just let me explain, he whispered, his voice barely audible now. I didn't want this. I didn't want to lose you. I laughed bitterly, the sound cold and empty. Lose me? I echoed. You never cared about losing me. You cared about winning, about making sure you came out on top, no matter what it cost me. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. The adrenaline was still coursing through my veins, but I had to stay calm. This wasn't over yet. I had more to do. He hadn't just stolen my money. He had stolen my trust, my peace of mind, and he was going to pay for all of it. You know what's going to happen now, right? I asked, my voice low and unwavering. He didn't respond, but I could see the fear in his eyes as he realized what I meant. I'm going to the police, and this time, you won't get away. Not like you did before? His eyes widened in panic. No, please. But I cut him off, holding up my phone, showing him the recording. His face went pale as he recognized what it was. It was a video, a recording of him admitting everything. Of him bragging about his plans, about how he was going to leave me with nothing. You didn't think I'd be recording this whole time, did you? I asked, a twisted satisfaction curling in my chest. You really thought you could disappear and leave me behind, but now I have everything I need to make sure you're never going to get away with it. He was speechless, his mouth moving but no words coming out. The realization that he was no longer in control, that his entire plan had unraveled, hit him like a freight train. He looked from me to the phone and back again, but there was no way out now. He had been caught in the trap I set for him. I stood there, watching him as he crumbled. The man who thought he could outsmart me, now reduced to nothing more than a man who had lost everything. And as I watched him, I realized something. I wasn't just taking back what he had stolen from me. I was taking back my life. And this time, no one was going to take it away from me again. The silence that filled the room after I showed him the video was deafening. James stood frozen, his face ashen, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. His mind was spinning, struggling to find an escape from the mess he had created. I could see the panic in his eyes, and for a brief moment, a small part of me almost felt sorry for him. But then, I remembered everything he had done, the lies, the deceit, the way he had manipulated me for so long. Any ounce of sympathy vanished. He stumbled toward the door, his hands reaching for the handle in a desperate attempt to flee. But I was ready. I moved swiftly, blocking his path. You're not going anywhere, I said firmly. This time there's no escape. His eyes flashed with a mix of anger and fear. You think you can just destroy everything? You don't know what you're doing, Sophie, he spat, his voice trembling with rage. I shook my head, my eyes never leaving his. No, James, you're the one who doesn't know what you're doing. You've been destroying everything for years, and I've had enough. My voice was steady, unwavering, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding in his mind. He backed away from me, his mind racing for a way to turn the situation in his favor. I can explain everything. We can work this out, he begged, desperation creeping into his voice. Just give me one chance. One chance? I repeated, my lips curling into a bitter smile. You had your chances, James. You've used every one of them. This isn't about working it out. This is about you facing the consequences of your actions. He stopped, his head hanging low in defeat, as if the weight of his own lies had finally crushed him. Please, Sophie, don't do this. I never meant for things to go this far, he whispered, his voice breaking. But I couldn't afford to listen to him anymore. I had already heard enough lies. You wanted to make sure I couldn't stop you, didn't you? I said coldly, stepping closer. Well, now you're going to see what happens when someone finally stops you. I reached for my phone and hit send, forwarding the video and all the evidence to the authorities. There was no going back now. The trap was complete, and James was caught. As I hit the send button, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. It was over. And for the first time in a long time, I knew I had won. The sound of sirens filled the air as they approached the hotel, growing louder with each passing second. I stayed where I was, standing tall, my hand gripping the phone tightly. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't shaking anymore. This was the moment I had waited for, the moment when everything he had done would finally catch up to him. Within minutes, the hotel room door burst open and 2 police officers stepped in, followed by a detective. James froze, his eyes darting between the officers and me, but he didn't make a move. The reality of his situation had set in. He knew it was over. James Bennett. one of the officers said in a no-nonsense tone, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "You're under arrest for theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." James opened his mouth to protest, but the words didn't come. His chest heaved with panic, but there was no denying the evidence that had been placed before him. His lies, his escape plan, everything had been laid bare. He was trapped. The officer stepped forward, handcuffing him as James muttered under his breath, his mind still scrambling for a way out. "Sophie, please, you don't understand." But I didn't let him finish. I was done listening to him. "I understand perfectly, James," I said coldly, my voice unwavering. "You thought you could destroy my life and get away with it. But not anymore. Not today." The officers guided him toward the door, but before he was completely out of sight, I heard him speak again, his voice low and desperate. "I never meant for it to end like this, Sophie. I just wanted a chance at something better." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. His words were empty, and I knew the truth now. The truth about who he really was. As the door slammed shut behind them, I took a long, steadying breath, feeling the weight of the last few days lift off my shoulders. I had done it. He was gone, and I had finally taken back control. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. News of James's arrest spread like wildfire, and I found myself flooded with phone calls and messages. People who had once admired him now turned their backs, realizing the depth of his betrayal. But the most important thing was that I had regained my peace. The hole he had left in my life, the one I had been trying to fill for so long, was finally starting to heal. I didn't care about the gossip, the whispers. I didn't care what people thought about my marriage, about my past. What mattered was that I had come out stronger. I had trusted my instincts, and they had led me to the truth. I had exposed James for the man he truly was, and I had shown myself just how strong I could be. A few months later, I stood at the front of a room filled with business leaders, preparing to give the keynote speech at a prestigious conference. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just a few months ago, I had been at my lowest, wondering how I would ever pick up the pieces of my life. But here I was, stronger than ever, standing tall in front of a crowd that respected me for who I was and what I had overcome. As I finished my speech, a woman approached me, her eyes full of admiration. "How did you stay so calm through everything?" she asked. "How did you keep going?" I smiled softly, my heart full of gratitude for the journey I had been on. "I trusted myself," I said. "I believed in my ability to handle whatever came my way, and I never let fear stop me from moving forward." Later that evening, I received a confirmation email from one of my biggest clients, renewing their contract for another 3 years. I smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. This was my victory, not just in business, but in life. I had survived betrayal. I had outsmarted those who tried to tear me down, and now I was standing at the top. As I walked out of the conference hall, I glanced at my phone. There was a small news article about James and his partner, Nina, beginning their prison sentences. I didn't read the details. I didn't need to. The life I had now was all that mattered. I had rebuilt myself piece by piece, and I was stronger for it. Success wasn't just about the deals or the clients. It was about knowing that I could rise above anything life threw my way. And with that thought, I took the next step forward, my future bright and full of possibilities. The best revenge wasn't about getting even. It was about moving forward and succeeding despite those who tried to hold me back.